doctor mourns her father on Christmas until a kind man and his dog transform her night. The crystal chandelier in the Hotel Melbrook lobby cast prismatic shadows across the marble floor, each fragment of light a reminder of the fortune Celeste Davenport had inherited and never wanted. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, watching the Pacific sunset paint the California coastline in shades of amber and rose, colors her father had loved. 5 years, 5 Christmas Eves since the phone call that shattered her world. "Ms. Davenport?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The new maintenance staff member is here for orientation. Should I send him to HR, or would you like to meet him first?" Celeste touched the silver locket at her throat, the one containing a tiny photograph of her father astride his beloved 1972 Harley-Davidson, the same deep blue as the ocean beyond her window. She'd made it a tradition to personally meet every employee hired during the holiday season. Her father's tradition, one of the few she'd maintained after his death, transformed her from a carefree college senior into the reluctant CEO of a luxury hotel empire. "Send him up," she said, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd learned to command respect at 23, when grief and responsibility arrived in the same devastating package. She smoothed her royal blue blazer and adjusted her denim shorts, a deliberate contradiction that had become her signature, the billionaire who refused to be confined by executive suits, who walked the line between the world her father built and the authenticity she desperately tried to preserve. Her reflection in the darkened computer screen showed a woman the business magazines called the Golden Heir, blonde hair, catching light like spun gold, blue eyes that could freeze a boardroom or warm a conversation, sun-bronzed skin that spoke of stolen hours on the beach when the weight of legacy became too heavy. But tonight she just looked tired. The knock on her door was tentative, almost apologetic. "Come in," Celeste called, turning from the window. The man who entered wasn't what she expected. Most maintenance workers approached her office with either obsequious deference or barely concealed resentment. This one walked with quiet dignity, his blue uniform clean and pressed, yellow work gloves folded respectfully in his hands. He was perhaps 28, with dark hair slightly disheveled from the wind, brown eyes that held both intelligence and something else, a shadow she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. Sorrow, the kind that becomes part of your architecture. "Ms. Davenport," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm Ryan Walker. Thank you for taking the time to meet me personally. I know Christmas Eve is—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know it's a difficult time to start a new position." Something in his tone made Celeste look at him more carefully. There was education in his speech, a thoughtfulness that suggested this job was a chapter in a longer story, not the whole narrative. "Mr. Walker," she acknowledged, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit. I like to know the people who keep this place running. The invisible hands that make luxury feel effortless." A slight smile crossed his face. "That's a kind way to describe mopping floors and fixing leaky faucets." "It's an honest description of essential work," Celeste corrected, settling into her own chair. "My father taught me that dignity isn't determined by title. He started as a bellhop in this very hotel before he bought it 40 years ago." She paused, surprised at herself for sharing that. She rarely spoke of her father to employees. It felt like displaying a wound. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Walker. Your resume says you have mechanical experience." Something flickered in Ryan's expression, a tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible tension in his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am. I worked as a motorcycle mechanic for several years, specialized in vintage bikes, Harleys, Triumphs, Indians. But circumstances changed and I needed something more stable." Celeste's hand moved unconsciously to her locket. "Motorcycles. My father rode a 1972 Harley-Davidson, electric blue, original parts. He said it was the one thing money couldn't improve. It was already perfect." The color drained from Ryan's face so quickly that Celeste leaned forward in alarm. "Mr. Walker, are you all right?" He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. For a moment she thought he might stand up and walk out. Instead, he closed his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough. "It's just, that's a very specific bike. Rare, beautiful machines. Your father had excellent taste." "Had?" Celeste echoed softly. "He died 5 years ago today. Accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. They said he didn't suffer, but I've never believed that. How do you not suffer when you're losing everything you love in an instant?" The silence that followed was profound. When Ryan opened his eyes, they were wet with unshed tears, and Celeste felt something shift in the room, a recognition of shared pain that transcended their different positions, their different worlds. "I lost someone too," Ryan said quietly. "Not the same way, but the guilt." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I'm sorry. This is inappropriate. You don't hire maintenance staff to hear their life stories." "Maybe I should," Celeste said, and meant it. "Hello, my friend. How was your day today? Is everything okay?" The unexpected shift to casual English, the genuine concern in her voice, seemed to surprise him. Ryan managed a weak smile. "Honestly, today's been heavier than I expected. New job, Christmas Eve, memories I can't quite outrun. But I'm here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity." Celeste studied him with renewed interest. There was a story here, layers beneath the surface that called to something in her. The part that had been numb for 5 years. The part that recognized a fellow traveler in the landscape of loss. "The Hotel Melbrook has excellent benefits," she heard herself saying. "But the best one isn't listed in the employee handbook. We take care of our own. If you ever need to talk, my door is open. Not as your boss, as someone who understands that some days just showing up is an act of courage." Ryan's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the executive office with its panoramic views and expensive art dissolved. They were just two people who'd survived terrible things, standing on opposite sides of a desk that suddenly seemed much less important than the conversation happening across it. "Thank you," Ryan said simply. "That means more than you know." As he stood to leave, something fell from his jacket pocket. A small leather keychain, worn smooth by years of handling. It landed on the marble floor with a soft clink, and Celeste automatically bent to retrieve it. Her heart stopped. Attached to the leather was a motorcycle ignition key, old and tarnished, but it was the silver tag hanging beside it that made the world tilt on its axis. Engraved in elegant script were two initials, R.D., Richard Davenport, her father. Her hand trembled as she held the keychain up to the light. "Where did you get this?" Ryan had frozen halfway to the door. His face was ashen, his expression a mixture of horror and resignation, the look of a man whose carefully guarded secret had just detonated in his hands. "Ms. Davenport," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "These are my father's initials," Celeste interrupted, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "This is a key to a 1972 Harley-Davidson. How do you have this? Where did you—" The room spun as impossible connections formed in her mind. "You said you were a motorcycle mechanic. You said you specialized in vintage Harleys." Ryan closed his eyes, and when he spoke, each word seemed dragged from somewhere deep and painful. 5 years ago, December 24th, a man brought his blue Harley to my shop in Santa Monica, said it was running rough, wanted it perfect for a Christmas Day ride up the coast. I did a full inspection, tuned the carburetor, checked the electrical system. Everything seemed perfect. I gave him the key back, wished him Merry Christmas. Celeste's legs gave out. She sank into her chair, the keychain still clutched in her fist. No, you're saying—" "I'm saying I was the last mechanic to work on your father's bike before the accident," Ryan finished, his voice breaking. "I've carried that key for 5 years. The spare he left with me, the one I was supposed to mail back but couldn't because 2 days after Christmas, I saw the news about Richard Davenport's death, and I knew it was the same man, the same bike, the same Christmas Eve." The office was silent except for the sound of Celeste's ragged breathing. 5 years of grief and unanswered questions crystallized into a single, devastating moment. The man standing before her, the gentle-voiced maintenance worker she'd felt an inexplicable connection to, was tied to the worst day of her life. "Did you—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the terrible question forming in her mind. "I've asked myself that every day for 5 years," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Did I miss something? Was there a flaw I didn't catch? A weakness in the brake line? An electrical fault that caused the accident? The police report said it was black ice on the highway, no mechanical failure. But I've never been able to let go of the question, what if I missed something? What if my work, my hands, contributed to your father's death?" Celeste stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She wanted to scream, to throw him out, to retreat into the numbness that had protected her for so long. But something in Ryan's face stopped her. The raw honesty of his guilt, the weight of responsibility he'd carried alone, the fact that he'd applied to work at her hotel knowing who she was, knowing the risk of this exact moment. "Why did you come here?" she demanded. Why work for me of all people? Ryan met her gaze steadily, though tears streamed down his face. Because I needed to know you, to understand the life I might have affected, to see if there was any way to— He laughed bitterly. To what? Atone? Make amends? There's no restitution for loss like yours. I know that. But I couldn't move forward without standing in the shadow of what I might have done, without being honest about the fact that your father's death has haunted every moment of my life since it happened. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible, and somehow inexplicably opening a door Celeste hadn't known existed. This man, this stranger who was no longer a stranger, had loved someone too, had lost someone, carried the specific torture of wondering if he could have prevented it. She understood that torture intimately. Get out, she whispered, then louder. Get out of my office. I need to think. I can't do this right now. Ryan nodded, his face crumpling with grief. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Davenport, your father was kind to me. In the 20 minutes we talked while I worked on his bike, he told me about his daughter who was going to change the world. He said you had his stubbornness and your mother's compassion, and that combination would make you unstoppable. He loved you more than anything. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Celeste stood alone in her office, her father's key cutting into her palm as Christmas lights twinkled mockingly across the city below. Outside her window, she could see the parking lot, and there, glinting under the streetlights, was a blue Harley-Davidson, Ryan's bike, the same deep electric blue as her father's. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and finally, after 5 years of controlled grief, she sobbed. The hotel bar was nearly empty on Christmas Eve. Most of the staff had gone home to their families, leaving only a skeleton crew to attend to the few guests who'd chosen the Hotel Melbrock for their holiday celebrations. Celeste sat in a corner booth, still in her blazer and shorts, a glass of her father's favorite whiskey untouched before her. She'd tried to work, to lose herself in spreadsheets and renovation proposals, but her hands kept returning to the keychain, her mind replaying Ryan's confession, her heart torn between rage and a strange, unwelcome empathy. The police report had been clear: black ice, loss of control, instant impact, no mechanical failure. Her father had been an experienced rider, but the Pacific Coast Highway on a winter night was unforgiving. She'd read that report 100 times, memorizing every clinical detail because it was the only narrative she had. But now, there was another narrative, a mechanic who'd touched her father's bike hours before his death, a man who'd carried guilt like a stone for 5 years, a connection she'd never imagined existed. Ms. Davenport? She looked up to find Ryan standing a respectful distance from her booth. He'd changed out of his uniform into jeans and a worn leather jacket, his yellow work gloves replaced by the uncertain hands of someone who didn't know if he was welcome. I know you told me to leave, he said quietly, but I realized I left something important unsaid. May I sit down just for a moment? May I sit down? Celeste gestured to the opposite seat, too exhausted to protest. Ryan sat, his hands clasped on the table between them. Up close in the dim bar lighting, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the exhaustion that matched her own, the vulnerability of someone who'd stopped running from a painful truth. I need you to understand something, Ryan began. When I saw your father's obituary, when I read about his family and his legacy and the daughter he left behind, I broke, completely broke. I was already struggling. My wife had left 6 months earlier, my shop was failing, I was barely holding on. And then this happened, and I couldn't reconcile the man I'd met, this warm, alive person who talked about his daughter with such pride, with the tragedy in the news. He paused, his voice thick. I became obsessed with finding out everything about Richard Davenport, read every article, watched every interview, and in doing that, I learned about you, about how you put your life on hold to run this hotel, about how you honor your father's legacy while trying to forge your own path, about the scholarship fund you started for hospitality workers' children, about your refusal to sell even when corporations offered billions. Celeste's throat tightened. That doesn't explain why you're here, why you applied for a job mopping my floors when you were a skilled mechanic. Because I needed to see if the guilt I carried was justified, Ryan said simply. I needed to know if I'd destroyed something precious, if my work had failed someone who mattered. And selfish as it is, I needed to be close to your father's legacy, to understand what I might have taken from the world. That's incredibly invasive, Celeste said, but her voice lacked conviction. It is, Ryan agreed. It's inappropriate, and probably unhealthy and definitely crossing boundaries I have no right to cross. But I'm done lying, done hiding. You asked why I came here. The truth is I came here to confess, to tell you who I am and what I might have done, to give you the choice of what happens next. Celeste stared at him, at this man who'd inserted himself into her life carrying secrets and sorrow. She should fire him, ban him from the hotel, erase this uncomfortable connection. But something stopped her. Maybe the bone-deep loneliness of someone who'd been strong for so long, she'd forgotten how to be honest. Maybe the recognition that Ryan's pain was as real as her own. Maybe just the exhaustion of carrying grief alone. What happens next, she said slowly, is you tell me everything. Every detail of that day. What my father said, what he was like, what you talked about. I've spent 5 years with nothing but police reports and fading memories. You're telling me you had 20 minutes with him on his last day alive, so give me those 20 minutes. Give me something real. Ryan's eyes widened. Are you sure? It might hurt more than help. Everything hurts, Celeste said flatly. At least this way, I'll have something new to hurt about. So Ryan talked. He described how Richard Davenport had rolled the Harley into his small Santa Monica shop just before noon, how the bike gleamed even under the harsh fluorescent lights, how her father had run his hand lovingly over the chrome. He told me he'd bought this bike the year you were born, Ryan said, his voice soft with memory. Said it was his celebration gift to himself, his promise that fatherhood wouldn't mean giving up the things that made him feel alive. He took you on your first ride when you were 3 months old, strapped into a special carrier he'd custom made. Your mother was furious, but you'd laughed the whole time. Celeste's hand went to her mouth. She'd heard that story, but hearing it from someone who'd heard it from her father in his voice, his words, it was like receiving a message from beyond the grave. Ryan continued, painting a picture of a man who was excited about Christmas, who'd planned to surprise Celeste with a rare first-edition book she'd been searching for, who'd talked about his pride and how she was handling law school, how she'd chosen to focus on labor rights and worker protections. He said you got your sense of justice from your mother, but your stubbornness from him, Ryan recounted. He laughed and said it was a dangerous combination for anyone trying to take advantage of you. He seemed so happy, so full of life. He kept checking his watch because he wanted to get home in time to help your mother with Christmas Eve dinner. He said it was tradition. He always made the stuffing because he was the only one who knew his mother's secret recipe. Tears streamed down Celeste's face. These details, these tiny intimacies, they were gifts she hadn't known she needed. The father in Ryan's story wasn't the tragic figure from obituaries or the frozen memory from her grief. He was alive, real, present. Thank you, she whispered. You can't know what this means. I think I can, Ryan said gently. I lost my father when I was 16. Car accident. For years, I wished I could talk to anyone who'd seen him on his last day, who could tell me something I didn't know, some proof that he existed beyond my memories. They sat in silence, two orphans of sudden loss connected by a blue motorcycle and the strange mathematics of tragedy. What about you? Celeste asked finally, wiping her eyes. You mentioned your wife left. You gave up being a mechanic. What happened to your life after that day? Ryan's expression darkened. My wife, ex-wife now, left because I couldn't let go of the guilt. She said I was obsessed with a stranger's death, that I was using it as an excuse not to fix our marriage. Maybe she was right. The shop failed because I couldn't focus. I'd be working on a bike and suddenly I'd freeze, wondering if I was missing something critical, if my hands were about to send another person to their death. He laughed bitterly. Dramatic, I know, but that's what trauma does. It makes everything catastrophic. I lost my career, my marriage, my sense of purpose. For a while I lived in my car, slept in parking lots, showered at the beach. I hit bottom hard. What changed? Celeste asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. I decided that if I couldn't be a mechanic anymore, I could still be useful. So I started taking whatever work I could find. Maintenance, janitorial, manual labor. And strange as it sounds, there's peace in that work. In making things clean, fixing what's broken, keeping systems running. It's honest work with immediate results. You mop a floor, and it's clean. You fix a leak, and the problem stops. There's no ambiguity, no haunting questions. Celeste understood that more than he knew. How many times had she thrown herself into hotel operations, into the minutiae of housekeeping standards and maintenance schedules, because it was concrete and controllable in a way grief never was. So you found peace in work you were overqualified for, she said. And now you're here, Mopping floors in a hotel owned by the daughter of the man whose death changed your life. That's either poetic or insane. I can't decide which. Both, Ryan said with a small smile. Definitely both. Against all reason, Celeste smiled back. There was something absurd about this whole situation. Something darkly funny about the universe's sense of timing. On the anniversary of her father's death, the mechanic who'd touched his bike hours before the accident walked into her life, fell into her employ, and confessed everything. I should fire you, she said. This whole situation is inappropriate. You sought out this job under false pretenses. You've been essentially stalking my family's tragedy. I know, Ryan said, and I'll leave right now if that's what you want. I'll disappear, and you'll never see me again. Celeste looked at him. Really looked. She saw the guilt he carried, yes, but also the integrity of someone who'd chosen honesty when lies would have been easier. She saw the empathy of someone who understood loss from the inside. She saw a man who'd sacrificed his career and his sense of self because he couldn't bear the thought of causing harm. And she realized with startling clarity that she didn't want him to leave. No, she said slowly. Don't leave. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to be honest with me from here on out. About everything. And in exchange, I'm going to try to see you as Ryan Walker. Maintenance worker and recovering mechanic, not as a ghost from my father's last day. We're going to attempt something radical. What's that? Ryan asked warily. We're going to be human with each other, Celeste said. No boss and employee, no billionaire and janitor, no victim and perpetrator. Just two people who've survived terrible things and are trying to figure out what comes next. Ryan looked at her with something between hope and disbelief. Why would you do that? After everything I just told you? Celeste touched the keychain still resting on the table between them, her father's initials catching the dim light. Because for 5 years, I've been frozen in the moment I got that phone call. I've been the grieving daughter, the responsible heir, the strong CEO. I've been everything except alive. And maybe having someone who understands that specific kind of death in life could help me find my way back. She paused, then added softly, plus, I think my father would have liked you. He had a thing for people who took responsibility seriously, who chose integrity over easy escapes. The man you described yourself being before the accident, that's the kind of person he respected. Ryan's eyes filled with tears again. I don't deserve your kindness. Probably not, Celeste agreed. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. I'm so tired of being alone in this grief. So tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm barely holding on. So tired of running a hotel full of people while feeling completely isolated. I understand that, Ryan said quietly. More than you know. They sat in comfortable silence, the Christmas lights outside the window casting colored shadows across their table. Somewhere in the hotel, a piano played a melancholy version of Silent Night. The whiskey in Celeste's glass had gone warm, but she didn't care. Tell me something, she said eventually. The Harley you rode here tonight, is that why you kept riding? Even after everything? Ryan nodded. I bought it 2 years ago, when I'd saved enough from odd jobs. Same year, same color as your father's bike. My ex-wife would say it's unhealthy, that I'm unable to move on. My therapist calls it a complicated relationship with the past. What do you call it? Celeste asked. Remembrance, Ryan said simply. A way to honor what I might have destroyed. Every time I ride, I think about your father, about the joy he must have felt on those roads. I ride carefully, defensively, with a respect that borders on fear. It's my penance and my prayer. Celeste felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, but opening like ice beginning to thaw. I haven't been able to look at motorcycles since he died. Seeing yours in the parking lot tonight made me physically ill. But hearing you talk about why you ride, it's the first time I've considered that the bike wasn't the enemy. The bike was what he loved. Want to see it? Ryan asked suddenly. The bike, I mean. Not to ride, just to look. See if you can separate the machine from the tragedy. It was a terrible idea. It was Christmas Eve. She was emotionally raw, and this entire conversation had been a roller coaster of revelation and pain. Looking at Ryan's Harley would probably send her spiraling into another breakdown. Yes, Celeste heard herself say. Let's go look at it. The parking lot was quiet, empty except for a few employee vehicles and Ryan's Harley gleaming under the streetlights like a piece of sky that had fallen to earth. Celeste approached it slowly, her breath visible in the cool December air, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was beautiful. She could admit that now, seeing it through Ryan's eyes instead of through the lens of loss. The chrome was polished to a mirror shine, the blue paint deep and rich, the leather seat worn smooth by miles and weather. It looked exactly like her father's bike, not as a replica, but as a cousin, a member of the same proud lineage. "Can I touch it?" she asked, surprising herself. "Of course," Ryan said. Celeste reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the fuel tank. The contact sent a shock through her system. Not pain, but memory. She remembered being small, sitting on this exact kind of tank while her father held her steady. The rumble of the engine between her legs, the wind in her hair, the absolute certainty that as long as her father was there, she was safe. The memory didn't hurt the way she expected. It ached, yes, but it also felt like reunion, like rediscovering something precious she'd locked away. "He used to take me to the beach on Sunday mornings," she said softly, her hand still on the bike. "We'd ride up the coast before dawn, watch the sunrise over the water. My mother hated it, said it was dangerous, irresponsible. But those mornings were sacred to me. Just me and Dad and the bike and the infinite ocean." Ryan stood a respectful distance away, giving her space with the memory. "That sounds perfect." "It was," Celeste agreed, "until it became the reason he died. After the accident, I couldn't separate the joy from the tragedy. The bike became the enemy, the thing that took him from me. And now?" Ryan asked gently. Celeste considered the question, her hand still resting on the cold metal. "Now I think maybe the bike was just a bike. The tragedy was random. Black ice, wrong place, wrong moment. If it hadn't been the motorcycle, it could have been a car, a heart attack, any of 1,000 ways we lose people we love. The bike wasn't the enemy. Fate was. Chance was. The fundamental unfairness of the universe was." She turned to look at Ryan. "You carried guilt for 5 years over something you didn't cause. You destroyed your life because you couldn't forgive yourself for being human, for not being omniscient. The police report cleared the bike, but you never cleared yourself." Ryan's face was pale in the streetlight. "I couldn't. What if they missed something? What if you're holding yourself responsible for the uncontrollable?" Celeste interrupted. "What if your punishment is disproportionate to any possible error? What if you're using this guilt to avoid the harder work of rebuilding your actual life?" The words hung between them, sharp and true. Ryan flinched as if struck. "I could ask you the same thing," he said quietly. "What if you're using your father's legacy as an excuse not to live your own life? What if running this hotel is just an elaborate form of hiding?" Celeste opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. God help her. He was right. She'd poured herself into the Hotel Melbrook not just to honor her father, but to avoid the terrifying question, who was Celeste Davenport without her father's shadow, without grief as an identity, without responsibility as armor? "We're both pretty messed up," she said finally. "Catastrophically," Ryan agreed. They looked at each other across the blue Harley, two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss, and they laughed. It started as a small chuckle, grew into genuine laughter, and ended with both of them leaning against the bike, gasping for air, tears streaming down their faces, tears of laughter and grief and the strange relief of being truly seen. "This is insane," Celeste managed between laughs. "It's Christmas Eve. I'm in a parking lot with my employee, discussing trauma while touching a motorcycle that looks like my dead father's bike. This is not how I planned to spend tonight." "How did you plan to spend it?" Ryan asked, wiping his eyes. "Alone in my penthouse pretending to work, drinking expensive wine and avoiding every phone call from well-meaning friends trying to check on me," Celeste admitted. "It's become my tradition, suffering through Christmas Eve in solitary confinement." "That sounds horrible," Ryan said. "It is," Celeste agreed. "What about you? What were your plans?" Ryan gestured around the empty parking lot. "Work the night shift, maybe ride up the coast after, sit on the beach, think too much. Also, horrible. We should form a club," Celeste said. "People with terrible Christmas Eve plans." "Membership requirements?" Ryan asked, playing along. "Unresolved grief, self-destructive tendencies, and an inability to accept help from others," Celeste listed. "Also, a fondness for vintage motorcycles is preferred but not required." Ryan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face from haunted to hopeful. "I qualify on all counts." "Congratulations," Celeste said solemnly. "You're our first member, besides me, obviously. I'm the founder and president." "Obviously," Ryan echoed. "What does membership entail?" Celeste considered. "Well, we can't keep spending Christmas Eve alone, that's for sure. It's clearly not working for either of us. So new rule. From now on, members of the Terrible Christmas Eve Plans Club spend the evening together. Misery loves company and all that. Are you asking me to spend Christmas Eve with you? Ryan asked carefully, as if afraid he'd misunderstood. I'm suggesting that two people who would otherwise be alone and miserable might be slightly less miserable together, Celeste clarified. It's not a date. It's mutual support in the face of holiday-induced trauma. That might be the least romantic invitation I've ever heard, Ryan said, but he was smiling. Good, Celeste said. Romance is the last thing either of us needs. Friendship, honesty, and maybe some distraction from our respective emotional disasters. That I can do. Ryan extended his hand formally. Ryan Walker, founding member and professional disaster. Pleased to make your acquaintance? Celeste shook his hand, feeling the calluses from manual labor, the strength of someone who'd rebuilt himself from nothing. Celeste Davenport, also a disaster but with better real estate. Likewise. They stood there, hands clasped, two people who'd been strangers an hour ago and were now bound by confession, connection, and the strange alchemy of shared pain transformed into something lighter. So what do members of the Terrible Christmas Eve Plans Club do? Ryan asked, still holding her hand. Celeste thought about it. Something neither of us would do alone. Something that breaks our respective patterns of self-imposed isolation. I'm open to suggestions, Ryan said. Celeste looked at the Harley, at Ryan's hopeful face, at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. An idea formed. Reckless, possibly stupid, definitely outside her comfort zone. How would you feel about taking that bike for a ride? She asked. Up the coast like my father used to do. Just to the beach overlook. Maybe 20 minutes there and back. I haven't been on a motorcycle since he died. But I think maybe it's time. Ryan's expression turned serious. Are you sure? That's a big step. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for. I'm not sure about anything, Celeste admitted. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. I'm tired of avoiding everything that reminds me of him. Maybe facing it, really facing it, will help. Okay, Ryan said slowly. But we take it slow. And if at any point you want to turn back, we turn back. No questions, no judgment. Deal, Celeste said. Ryan handed her a helmet. He kept a spare, he explained, from the days when he'd had friends who rode with him. Celeste fitted it over her blonde hair, the weight of it familiar and foreign at once. Ready? Ryan asked, straddling the bike. Celeste climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her cheek pressed against his leather jacket. The position was intimate, but felt safe, like being anchored to something solid in a world that had proven unreliable. Ready, she said. The engine roared to life and they pulled out of the parking lot onto the Pacific Coast Highway. The night air was cold against her exposed legs. The sound of the engine a deep throb that vibrated through her entire body. Celeste closed her eyes and let herself remember. Her father's laugh. The way he'd point out dolphins in the waves. The stops for coffee at roadside diners. The absolute joy of motion, of speed, of freedom. The memories didn't hurt. Or rather, they hurt in a different way. The ache of love rather than the sharp pain of loss. She could hold both. The grief that he was gone and the gratitude that he'd existed. That she'd had those Sunday mornings. That love had been real and true even though it had ended too soon. They reached the overlook and Ryan parked the bike facing the ocean. The Pacific stretched before them, vast and dark and eternal, the moon painting a silver path across the waves. Celeste removed her helmet, her hair wild from the wind, her cheeks flushed from cold and emotion. How do you feel? Ryan asked. Alive, Celeste said, and the word felt like a revelation. For the first time in 5 years, I feel alive. They stood side by side looking out at the ocean. Two people who'd been drowning in separate griefs and had somehow found a lifeline in each other. Thank you, Celeste said softly, for being honest, for telling me about my father's last day, for taking this risk. Thank you for not firing me, Ryan said, for giving me a chance to explain, for being brave enough to get on this bike. Celeste turned to look at him, this man who'd stumbled into her life carrying secrets and sorrow, who'd offered her the gift of her father's last words, who'd made her laugh on the worst night of the year. I don't know what this is, she said honestly. This connection between us, it's built on tragedy and guilt and coincidence. It shouldn't work, but somehow it feels right, Ryan finished. Like we're supposed to be here in this moment helping each other figure out how to live after loss. Exactly, Celeste said. They stayed at the overlook for an hour, talking about everything and nothing. Ryan told her about his childhood in Oregon, his father's love of classic cars, his dream of opening a restoration shop before everything fell apart. Celeste shared stories about growing up in the hotel, about the pressure of inheriting an empire at 23, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw her as a boss or an heir, but never just as Celeste. When they finally rode back to the hotel, Celeste felt different, lighter. The weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, making room for something new. Possibility, maybe, or just the simple fact of connection. "What about your first love? Do you still remember?" Ryan asked as they pulled into the parking lot, the question in English catching her off guard. Celeste thought about it. "I do. He was my high school sweetheart. We broke up when I went to college. It was amicable but sad. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we'd tried to make it work." "Do you regret it?" Ryan asked. "No," Celeste said honestly. "We were kids. We grew into different people, but I'm grateful for what we had. It taught me what love could feel like, even if it didn't last." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's healthy, holding the good memories without being trapped by them." They dismounted, and Celeste returned the helmet. Standing in the parking lot, she felt the evening ending, felt the return to their regular lives looming. Boss and employee, billionaire and janitor, all the structures that complicated the simple human connection they'd found. "So," Ryan said awkwardly, "I guess I'll see you at work. Regular schedule starts tomorrow. Well, today. Christmas Day. Skeleton crew." "Actually," Celeste said impulsively, "I was thinking members of the Terrible Christmas Eve Plans Club might benefit from expanding to a Terrible Christmas Day Plans division. I'm having dinner at my place. Well, the penthouse. Nothing fancy, just food and conversation. Would you want to join me?" Ryan looked surprised. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on—" "You wouldn't be intruding," Celeste interrupted. "I'd be alone otherwise. And after tonight, I think alone is the last thing either of us should be." "Then yes," Ryan said, his face breaking into a smile. "I'd like that very much." As Celeste walked back into the hotel, her father's keychain in her pocket, the memory of the wind still in her hair, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope. And in the parking lot, Ryan Walker sat on his blue Harley, looking up at the penthouse windows where Celeste's light had just turned on, and he felt the same. Two people connected by tragedy, finding their way toward something that looked like healing. Christmas morning was still hours away, but already something had changed. The penthouse smelled of roasted chicken and herbs when Ryan knocked on the door at noon on Christmas Day. Celeste had spent the morning cooking, something she rarely did, usually relying on room service or catered meals, but today felt different. Today required the ritual of creation, the meditation of chopping vegetables and stirring sauces. She opened the door to find Ryan holding a small wrapped package, his eyes red-rimmed as if he'd been crying. "Come in," she said gently, stepping aside. Ryan entered hesitantly, looking around the penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist elegance. "This is beautiful," he said. "Your father had excellent taste." "Actually, this was all my doing after he died," Celeste admitted. "He preferred old-world luxury, heavy furniture, dark woods, oil paintings. I needed something lighter, cleaner, a space that was mine, not just inherited." Ryan nodded, understanding. "Reclaiming your environment. That's healthy." They settled at the dining table, and Celeste served the meal she'd prepared. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who've already shared their deepest wounds and no longer need to fill every moment with words. "I brought you something," Ryan said finally, pushing the wrapped package across the table. "I've been carrying it for 5 years, waiting for the right moment. I think that moment is now." Celeste's hands trembled as she unwrapped the paper. Inside was a leather journal, worn and creased, with her father's initials embossed on the cover. Her breath caught. "How do you have this?" "Your father left it in my shop," Ryan explained, his voice thick with emotion. "It was in the saddlebag of his Harley. When I heard about the accident, I couldn't bring myself to mail it to your family. I kept thinking I'd find the right time, the right way, but there never was a right way to say, 'Here's your father's journal.' I'm the mechanic who might have contributed to his death." Celeste opened the journal with shaking hands. The pages were filled with her father's distinctive handwriting, observations about hotel management, ideas for improvements, sketches of architectural details, but interspersed throughout were personal notes. "Celeste called today. She's worried about her constitutional law exam. I told her the same thing I always do, trust yourself. She's brilliant, but she doesn't see it yet. Someday she will. 23 years of watching my daughter grow, and I'm still amazed by her. She has her mother's compassion and my stubbornness. The world won't know what hit it. Tears streamed down Celeste's face as she read page after page of her father's private thoughts, his love for her documented in casual observations and proud declarations. Then she reached the final entry, dated December 24th, 5 years ago. Got the Harley tuned today. The mechanic, young guy named Ryan, did excellent work. We talked about purpose and legacy. He's struggling, I could tell. Reminded me of myself at his age before I found my path. I gave him my card, told him to call if he ever needed advice about starting a business. Something tells me he's meant for more than fixing bikes in a small shop. Tomorrow is Christmas. Celeste comes home from law school. I can't wait to see her face when she opens her gift. She's going to change the world, my daughter. I'm so proud I could burst. Life is good. Life is very, very good. Celeste closed the journal and looked at Ryan through her tears. He believed in you. He wanted to help you. I never called, Ryan whispered. After the accident, I found his business card in my shop drawer, but I was so consumed with guilt, I couldn't imagine reaching out to his family. I felt I'd forfeited any right to his kindness. You've been punishing yourself for 5 years over an accident you didn't cause, Celeste said softly, carrying guilt that was never yours to carry. My father, he saw potential in you. He wanted you to succeed. Don't you think the best way to honor him would be to actually live the life he believed you could have? Ryan's composure crumbled. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held back for years. Celeste came around the table and wrapped her arms around him, holding him the way she wished someone had held her in those first terrible days after her father's death. I'm so sorry, Ryan gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry I kept this journal. I'm sorry for everything before. There's nothing to save him from, Celeste said firmly. It was black ice, it was chance. It was the universe being random and cruel, but it wasn't you. Do you hear me? It wasn't your fault. They stayed like that for a long time. Two people finally releasing years of accumulated grief and guilt, finding in each other's embrace the permission to forgive themselves. When Ryan finally lifted his head, his face was blotchy and wet, but his eyes were clearer than Celeste had seen them. Thank you, he said simply. For this, for everything. Thank you for giving me back my father's words, Celeste replied. This journal, it's the greatest gift I could have received. It's him alive and present and proud of me. I didn't know how much I needed that. They returned to the table, the meal now cold, but neither caring. Ryan told her about the business card he'd kept, about the dreams of a restoration shop he'd abandoned, about the years of drifting and self-destruction. I want to try again, he said suddenly. Not immediately. I need to rebuild savings, develop a solid plan. But hearing you talk about reclaiming your life, about not letting grief define you, it made me realize I've been using my guilt as an excuse not to try. If I never pursue my dreams, I can never fail again. But that's not living. That's just existing. My father would be happy to hear that, Celeste said with a smile. He believed in second chances. Hell, his whole life was a second chance. Working his way from bellhop to owner, proving that background doesn't determine destiny. What about you? Ryan asked. What's your second chance going to look like? Celeste thought about it, looking around her penthouse, her inherited empire, her carefully controlled life. I think I need to figure out who I am beyond being Richard Davenport's daughter. I've been so focused on preserving his legacy that I forgot to build my own. Maybe it's time to take some risks, make some changes, actually live instead of just managing. That sounds terrifying, Ryan observed. Absolutely, Celeste agreed, but also necessary. We can't heal if we're not willing to change. They talked through the afternoon, the conversation flowing from painful honesty to hopeful planning to moments of laughter. The connection between them deepened, rooted not in romance but in mutual recognition. Two souls who'd survived darkness and were tentatively reaching toward light. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ryan stood to leave. Thank you for today, he said, for Christmas dinner, for listening, for forgiving what I couldn't forgive in myself. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth, Celeste replied, for giving me my father's journal, for helping me remember that he loved life, loved me, loved riding that blue Harley. You gave me permission to love those things again, too. At the door, they hugged, not as employer and employee, not as tragedy's victims, but as friends who'd found each other in unexpected circumstances and chosen to move forward together. "See you at work tomorrow?" Ryan asked. "Actually," Celeste said with a mischievous smile, "I'm thinking of making a policy change. Maintenance staff with mechanical expertise should probably be consulting on our vehicle fleet management. Interested in a different role?" Ryan's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Celeste said. "You're overqualified for mopping floors, and I need someone I trust to help modernize our operations. Plus, it might be nice to have a friend in management instead of just employees." "I don't know what to say," Ryan stammered. "Say yes," Celeste suggested. "Say you're ready to stop punishing yourself and start building something new. Say you trust me the way I'm choosing to trust you." "Yes," Ryan said, his voice strong and sure. "Yes to all of that." After he left, Celeste stood at her window, her father's journal pressed to her chest, watching Ryan's blue Harley pull out of the parking lot. The bike's taillights disappeared into the evening traffic, but she felt no fear, no surge of traumatic memory. Just gratitude that machines could carry us toward joy as well as sorrow, that endings could become beginnings, that even the darkest nights could give way to unexpected morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Merry Christmas, Celeste. Thank you for giving me my life back." She typed her reply with a smile. "Merry Christmas, Ryan. Thank you for reminding me I still have one to live." Outside her window, stars emerged one by one, and Celeste Davenport, billionaire orphan survivor, felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years: peace, and the knowledge that tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, held possibilities she'd been too afraid to imagine. The blue Harley had brought them together through tragedy. Now it would witness their healing, their growth, their journey from brokenness toward something beautifully whole.